one time I was leading the HR compliance team. So after doing that for a few years in India, different roles all within HR, I transferred to the UK, first to manage UK HR, and then my role expanded to manage HR for Europe. And then again, after a few years being there, in 2018, I transferred over to the US for an expanded role. So early on in my career, I had promised myself that one thing that I won't compromise on is my ability to keep learning. And over the years, eValueServe has proven to me over and over again that learning can come in many ways. And while taking new roles, learning new things is important. You don't have to always look outside of your current firm to find those opportunities. So 16 years, still here, very much enjoying my stint with the company. That's a little bit about my background. Today, really excited to be here, and I'm really looking forward to co-hosting this session with Carolina. Carolina?
Thank you, Bhavana. I'm also really excited about co-hosting this session with you. You and I have I feel like we have good rapport, so I really enjoy all of our conversations. I'm excited about this session. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Carolina Zamora. For those of you that don't know me, I lead the Latin American operations for eValueServe. I've also been with eValueServe for a long time, since 2008. Also started as a senior associate in the Chile office back then. I joined what was then known as the business research area. Now it's CAPS, corporates research, and I started doing Latin American market research and business research. And just like Bhavana, I've had plenty of opportunities to move in different roles within the company. So after a few months, I became manager and started leading a Latin American research desk here in Chile. After a few years of doing that, then I moved to the other side, to FS, to lead in 2010. And that really was just, I remember the country manager back then, Mohit, mentioned to me, he's like, are you interested in this opportunity? And I was like, well, I never thought I'd do a career in FS. And he's like, this is going to be your golden opportunity. I was like, well, okay, I trust you. I know that you have my best interest at heart, so I'm going to trust you. I'm going to apply for it. And it was. I mean, that team just grew from like 10 people to, I think towards the end, we were about 150 people here in Chile. And that also opened up a lot of opportunities for me to lead. But then after a few years, I was leading the entire financial services area here in Chile, working with excellent leaders within the organization. And then in 2018, I took on the role of country head for Chile. And earlier this year, since we opened the operations in Colombia, now my role is expanded to all of Latin America. So it's been an exciting journey, and I'm happy to share whatever little insights and tidbits I have. I'm happy to share them with you all.
Excellent. There are some things even I didn't know about you, Carolina. So, so it's good to know. So with the introductions out of the way, let's start by discussing the three categories. That's the topic today: the good, bad, and the ugly. When I was trying to prepare or do some research for this topic last week, I realized there's so many articles and studies, if you just Google, on what makes a good leader. And, eValueServe, we have our own version of it. It's called Manager Effectiveness Index, MEI survey, which we run every year. But today we will pivot that a little bit, and we'll sort of head in the direction of sort of discussing not just what's good, but we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of being in a leadership role. So, Carolina, let's start. What's the good part?
Well, the good part is you've gotten a promotion. You are a leader in the organization. So that's, first of all, it indicates that you're advancing in your career, right? Whether you are going through a people leadership role or a thought leadership role. So you are advancing in your career. And that advancement, even though I feel like there's always opportunity for leadership at every layer in the organization, that advancement in the corporate ladder gives you better access to resources. So now that you are in in the leadership position, I wouldn't say that you now have a seat at the table, because I feel like all of our team members have a seat at the table, but you have a better seat at the table. And it is, you have an opportunity to use your voice at that table to get the things done that you want to do. So you have better access to leadership, to top leadership. You have better access to resources that you can use to meet your objectives. So now, as a leader, you are setting the vision for how you want things done. You have some level of autonomy to, you don't have to listen to the project manager on how you're going to do a project. Now you are that project manager, so you set the vision of how you want things done. So it's your opportunity to enact the changes and improvements that you've always wanted to do. So it also, you have increased autonomy, you have more access to resources, you also have a higher level of influence, so you can use that voice to provide feedback, to say the things that you like, what you don't like, and also to implement the changes that you want. So, but you also have responsibilities, right? So you are not just, you are responsible for a team. So you are responsible, first of all, a good leader is an effective leader that meets their objectives. So you have to get things done. So to get things done, you need to work with a team. And you become now responsible for that team and making sure that they have a good environment that they can prosper in. So you also take on that responsibility of making sure that your team feels that they're taken care of, that your partners, within the organization, feel like you are collaborative, that you're all going into the same direction, and that you're someone that people want to work with, basically. So, so I would say that all of those are good things about being the leader. You have more access to the organization and more visibility as well to the projects that you could take on. Bhavna, so what would you say? Would you add anything, or what would you say is the bad part of being a leader?
So I think you summarized the good part very well, Carolina. I agree with everything that you had said about the good aspects of being in a leadership role. You know, I personally sort of quite enjoy being in the leadership role, but I just feel that, like anything else in life, there's always this good part and there's always this bad aspects, right? Or if you want to call it bad, or maybe you want to call it downside of being a leader. There are a few that I can sort of think of. I guess the first one that comes to my mind immediately would be that being in a leadership role is it's sort of relentless. You've got to keep going always. I've never heard anyone say, you know what, I've had like a really amazing first quarter. Let me just relax for the rest of the year because I've done enough. So in a leadership role, you just gotta keep going. It does not stop. And you know that the buck stops at you. So if the team succeeds, you have to share the success with everyone. But if there is a failure, you as a leader have to take responsibility for it. And you heard many people say this: the higher up you go in the organization, the more lonely it gets, right? And that sort of goes back to, if there's a failure, you have to take responsibility as a leader. And no matter how confident or capable you are as a leader, at times it's scary. From time to time, self-doubts might also crop in. So that's one. I think it's relentless. The other downside that I can think of is, as a leader, you will go into uncharted territory. So this would often require change in how you would do things. You want to change a process, maybe you want to adapt a certain way of thinking and how you run a project. And change is always hard. And no matter how good the intent is, not everyone will see it the way that you see it, right? So in the process, when you're trying to drive change, some people will be upset. Worse, some people may be angry by the way, the path that you're taking. So I think it's also the downside or tough part of being a leader is it's not always easy to take people along on that journey. And I personally, my style is I want to take people along with me in the journey that we're trying to sort of do. So I think that's the second downside I feel of being in a leadership role. Um, the third I would say is, sometimes the way you lead can be very closely linked to your beliefs or your value system. So sometimes when somebody disagrees with you, it could be seen as that somebody sort of disagreeing with your value system, your core belief. So it can seem as an attack. In fact, when I was younger, new in a leadership role, I used to get really worked up when somebody used to disagree with me because I used to think, oh, they're trying to attack me. With more gray hair now and some more experience, I have now learned to disassociate the comment from the person who's making that comment. And I consciously remind myself still, it's sort of work in progress, that, these two are separate things. And I try and do whatever I can to avoid, my emotions getting the best of me. And the final point that I think I would make, that is the bad or the downside of being a leader is, when you're a leader, you have to take tough decisions. Some of which, or if you work like myself in human resources, many of those decisions will have impact on people. And that, I believe, is the tough part. I've been doing this for almost 2 decades, almost 20 years in HR, and I still struggle even to this day when taking some tough people decisions. So that was a long answer, but I hope I was able to explain some of the downsides that come with the good of being in a leadership role. So Carolina, back to you. What do you think is the ugly part, the third category that we're discussing today?
Well, the ugly part. So it's a very provocative adjective. But I wanted to make sure that what I convey is that ugly doesn't necessarily have to be bad. Ugly can be a situation where you're uncomfortable as a leader, something that, like the good is good, like, when you're feeling good. As you mentioned, some of the bad things are, I would say, are very manageable, and building resilience as a leader. We'll talk about resilience throughout this conversation because I think it's one of the most important qualities that any professional, let alone a leader, should have in today's environment. As if you're resilient, you can manage everything. But the ugly for me is like when you need to get your hands dirty. Like it's out of your comfort zone. It's not something that you're used to, and it has the potential to get bad. Like ugly bad is terrible, is a disaster. But ugly doesn't always need to be bad. For me, ugly is a situation that I haven't faced before or that I don't necessarily feel comfortable in. So as a leader, you find yourself in these situations, especially, I mean, let's look at the last 2 years, like pandemic here, different other social disruptions that we've seen around the world. But it can also be, it doesn't have to be a black swan event like a pandemic. It could be conflict with a coworker or a team member, something that you didn't see coming, a disruptive situation with the client, for instance, or a change in scenario of the business outlook. So the only way that you can prepare, that you can face an ugly situation and make sure that it doesn't turn ugly bad, is through preparation, I feel. You need to think through the situation and just really understand what's the scenario and define the next steps. And really just like the planning of really thinking through not one step ahead, but 2-3 steps ahead is very crucial on how to tackle a situation that's potentially ambiguous or it's potentially uncomfortable, it's potentially messy. And the thing is that you don't have to do it alone. I feel like sometimes when we think of ourselves as leaders or when we think of a leader, we think of like this one person up the top of the pyramid. And as you said, it's like leadership can get very lonely. But the important thing is that, or what has helped me at least in my path, and I don't claim to be like a great leader by any means, but what has helped me is to understand that you do have a support network, and that could be internal to the company, but it could also be external. It could be, starting with your family and your friends, someone that you can relax with when you are not at work and you can have, a break, a mental break. It could be a mentor, it could be a coach, But even internally, it could be your team members, someone that you use as a sounding board. Obviously, your reporting manager, your boss, like who you come to with certain concerns. You are not alone. And then when you talk through solutions, like maybe you're not necessarily asking someone to solve the problem for you, but you just need to talk through the situation. And using people as sounding boards has been very valuable to me because I have the answer. Probably I already know what I want to do in the back of my head. I just need to articulate it. But then people will always provide a second perspective. And that always helps to turn something uncomfortable into a little bit more manageable. But, in ambiguity, obviously, always try to get some clarity. That's always important. And then something ugly can be transformative, and it can lead to something beautiful because it's, first of all, like if you can manage a tough situation, a messy situation, it builds credibility for you as a leader within the organization. But I think most importantly, it shows yourself what you're capable of. And that helps you also build resilience because you're like, I've already gone through a tough situation before. There's no reason why I would not be able to handle it again. So, that's my 2 cents. So now that we've discussed about the good, the bad, the ugly aspects of being a leader, maybe we can deep dive a little bit more into some areas that we've discussed about Bhavna. What do you think? So, for example, you mentioned that as a leader, every decision that we take will get further scrutinized by other people. What are some of the qualities of a good leader that you have seen, and not just in your role, but as you work with many leaders in the organization and outside the organization? What are some of these good qualities?
That's a great question, Carolina. Thanks for that. Earlier, I sort of referenced a little bit about the Manager Effectiveness Index, MEI, that we run. And the survey asks employees to rate their managers on 10 key competencies that we believe in eValueServe are important to be a great leader. Some of these include, for example, my manager creates an inclusive team and shows concern for my well-being. Or my manager provides ongoing performance feedback. Another one is, my manager communicates clear performance objectives, sets clear objectives. He or she is productive, is result-oriented, and he or she is innovative. So these are some that we believe are important to be a good leader. There could be many more, right? So that's just the framework that we have over the years sort of adopted based on what we see is important for leading an effective team. And I think the other question that you sort of asked was, the decisions being scrutinized as a leader. And I do think that happens. But personally, like a lot of people say, oh, I don't really like that this decision's being scrutinized. I have the best intent. Why is somebody questioning me? I feel slightly differently about that because I think it's okay for people to sort of scrutinize, evaluate the decision that you're taking as a leader. And I think it's okay because nobody should have absolute power. So as leaders, when our actions we know are being observed by our immediate team or extended team, I think it keeps us responsible, it keeps us accountable, keeps us sort of all in sort of check. I always also say that leadership is not a popularity contest. You'll take some decisions that are popular, some that are tough decisions. And it's just a part of, being in a leadership role. So when I have to take difficult decisions myself, I always ask myself 2 questions. Is this decision in the overall interest of the organization of eValueServe? And the second question I ask myself is this consistent with my core value system? And the second question is usually when I say, hey, this is the right thing to do from a people perspective. That's where the second question sort of covers that aspect. And generally, if the answer is yes, no matter how hard the decision is, how difficult the change management will be, I generally want to go ahead with that. Yeah, so that's how I sort of use as the framework on a day-to-day basis. But let me ask you, Carolina, right? You've been in a leadership position for many years, and you currently lead one of our largest operations center. That's Chile, close to 600 employees that we currently are at. Now, these things, in my experience, are never accidental. So I'm sure this would have not happened without your hard work, your determination, and the excellent leadership skills that you demonstrate. So tell us, Carolina, for our audience, how can one become an authentic leader? And how do we inspire others to become the best versions of themselves?
Great question, and thank you for for your compliments as well. It's a great question, and I think I'll just take a step back. Like, why is it important to be an authentic leader, first of all? And I'm not just going to answer it from my perspective of being a leader, because there are times that obviously we all have self doubts, and it's like, yeah, probably not the best manager, people manager that I could be, and it's a work in progress, like you mentioned. But also from the perspective of great leaders that I've had in my career. So from both sides, the importance of being an authentic leader is that it generates trust with your team and with the organization. And if you're not being authentic, people will notice it in a heartbeat. They will know you are giving me a speech, you're being like a politician, and it generates suspicion. So you have to come to the table, to situations with authenticity, and that builds trust, because if people trust you, implementing change, implementing hard decisions is just going to be easier, because people might not see you right away, but they understand, they trust that you have their best interest at heart. So that's why it's important to be authentic. And what I believe is important to be authentic is that, just like you want your team members to feel safe and feel like they can be themselves or true selves at work, you should also bring yourself wholeheartedly to your role at work. And that starts with, I love something that you mentioned, like just staying true to your core values. Like, remember every time, like, what your true values are, because you might not always align, like, what you want to do with what you would do, with what needs to be done. But if you always keep your core values at heart, you will always think and tackle the situation with integrity, and that's very important. Another aspect, or the more important aspect of being an authentic leader, is that you have to be consistent. What you think, what you're saying, and how you act needs to be in as much alignment as possible. And you need to, like, basically walk the talk, right? Like, if you're saying one thing but you're doing something else, that's not being authentic. You also have to be very self-aware, understand what are your strengths, but also what are your weaknesses, and understand how you can maximize your strengths to overcome those areas of development. And that's where, like, building a great team that is complementary to you also comes into play. So I would definitely say self-awareness, consistency, showing accountability as well. This is I don't think this is the leadership of today, but like maybe the leadership of many years ago, where the leader needed to be like absolute, like no mistakes made, like this, like stoic, perfect person almost. But I think there's a lot of power in admitting when you've made a mistake, and when you show humility to your team, and at the end of the day, you're all in it together, like you're all a team. And if you can have a debate and a dialogue, and then admit when you've made a mistake, it shows to your team that you are you're being, genuine, and it shows accountability as well. And just in that vein, I would say, you have to be honest to people. I think many times we are afraid of conflict, because going into difficult situations, because we're not going to be comfortable. And there's many, like, we could deep dive into like the having conflict, but that's probably enough material for another session. But Do not procrastinate tough decisions. Prepare for those conversations well. There's a great book called Crucial Conversations that I highly recommend for anybody that wants to read more about it. Um, but in your feedback, when you're communicating, you can be honest, but always be kind and respectful. And then finally, I would say, well, not finally, but it's important to show appreciation for your team member. That also is something that I would definitely advise. And ultimately, what you want to do is create an environment where everybody feels safe, that they can come to you with their questions, and also when they need guidance. And you need to create an environment where people are not afraid to make mistakes. They don't feel like they're going to be punished for making mistakes, because otherwise you're not going to create a team or an environment where people take risk. And innovation comes from taking risk. Creativity comes from taking risk. So we definitely want our team to feel comfortable doing that. Um, so so that's what I would say.
Right. And let me ask you another one then. I mean, you talked about being authentic, being honest. Um, how do you sort of allow for building of that transparency in your style of leadership? I mean, how can we do that as leaders?
I think it all boils down to your core values as well. I think you have to be open, you have to be honest, like, as I said, and you need to be accessible to your team member. Sharing the good news is easy. There's, like, you get good news and you want to share them, right away. Sharing the bad news or tough news, it's definitely much more complex. And what I always say is, like, you need to prepare communication. You need to think of, like, who is this impacting? Does it need to be said? Does it need to be said right now? And who is this communication or this change impacting? And then think about who needs to be communicated and what. Um, because there's a fine line, as you in leadership, there's a fine line between things that need to be confidential, the business need to know, um, and transparency, right? Like, you want to be transparent and open with your team, but there's going to be things that you can't share right away. So there's definitely that fine line between being open and oversharing. So definitely I always keep in mind the need to know, what's the right time. Does it add any value to the conversation at this moment? And again, does it need to be said right now? Like, maybe there's an opportunity where you're going to be able to share that information in a couple of days, but not right now. So um, I would say, for the sake of transparency, be open. Like, I love having an open door policy as much as possible. And anybody in my team can come and ask me questions, and I'll do the best to answer. I also don't pretend to have all the answers. I feel like you can be truthful to say, I don't know, but I will always caveat it with, but let me find out for you and I'll get back to you. I try to always, like, take accountability for answering the questions or redirecting the person to the right person. Kind of like teach how to fish rather than giving people the fish. And finally, if you're not at liberty to say, like I always say, it's like, I cannot share this information with you right now, but more to come. So in your role, Bhavna, I'm sure that you've had to deal with many difficult conversations. How do you do how do you do this? And you've mentioned your moral compass and your values earlier on. How do you do the right thing with keeping your moral compass aligned?
Yeah. Oh, this is a tough one. So I just feel that a lot of situations, as you are in a leadership role, may not always be black or white. If that was the case, easy, we can all do it. But a lot of situations that we come across, you sort of operate in the gray. And that's what makes it hard, because at that point, you need to apply sort of the judgment. You need to take that judgment call based on the information available at hand, which, by the way, may not be the complete picture, but you have to do the best that you can given the decision that you need to take within a certain point of time. I also think just because something is hard you can't just brush it under the carpet. I think that's one of the mistakes that I see some leaders make, saying, "Oh, this is too hard. Let me not do anything about it because I don't know how to deal with that." But in my experience, problems just they don't just generally go away. You have to address them actively, right? I also feel that if you don't do that, what is the alternative, right? Sometimes not taking an action is worse, I feel, because the problem may then become much, much bigger when you're trying to sort of solve for it later. So overall, I whenever I do this, I sort of remind myself that there is, and you referenced this earlier, humility. I think that's an important characteristic trait, especially as you become more senior. I remind myself the importance of humility. That sometimes I will get things wrong. God knows how many times I have. Um, and I think it's important that a leader does not let their ego become so big that they cannot accept that they've made a mistake. Um, it's important to acknowledge, apologize, and learn from it. I think your team will respect you more for it. Okay, so that's how I would deal with it. There is no one perfect answer. You look at each situation, you do the best that you can. If you do make mistake, you sort of learn, and you the intent always is to keep learning from those mistakes and do better the next time you are in a similar situation. Um, how do you deal with situations, Carolina, when your team challenges you about a certain decision that you want to take?
Sure. And they challenge me quite a lot. Um, so there's two types of decisions, I would say. There's the ones where we have some influence or we can design ourselves. Like it's a problem and it's up to myself and my team to figure it out. And then there's other decisions that are, outside of my scope of control even. So in the first one, certainly I would involve my team as much as possible in the decision making. So it's we have a conversation around what's the objective, what's the problem, and how do we solve it. And there's many instances where we've had spirited discussions about the way forward and the next steps, but we sort of have a rule where we say in the room we disagree. We can disagree. We can voice our feedback. We can voice our concerns. We'll hash it out in the room. But we'll also get to an alignment and we'll get to a consensus or we'll get to a decision. And when we step out of the room, we all stand behind the decision. And I think that has worked well for now. We have each other's back. That's a decision that we've taken. The other set of decisions where even the decision is outside of my scope and it's something that I need to communicate, there's not a lot of that we can influence in the decision itself. And that's probably where I get the most challenge or the most pushback. So for me, it's important to explain. First of all, it's like, I feel it's important to explain what's behind the decision, what's the objective, what are the steps that are taken. Like as much as I can be transparent in what I know has led to that decision. Have a dialogue, try to understand what exactly is it that it's making this person or these people or my team uncomfortable. What is it that they're afraid of? And try to talk through those concerns and see if we can alleviate some of the concerns. And if there's definitely no impact that we can have in the decision, but what we can influence, what we can impact is perhaps the implementation or the communication of that decision to the rest of the organization. And that's where I always think it's important that we focus our energy on. It's like, maybe we can't change the decision because it's outside of our scope of control, but we can impact how it is communicated. So let's focus our energy and attention there and make it the best that it can be. And this is also where I feel like if you have been an authentic leader and you have established your trust and credibility with your team, this is when it comes into play. Credibility is kind of like a bank. You build it and it's like you have your little kitty and you're like putting the coins in as you grow in the organization and you build your credibility. And this is where you get to use them, because this is where your team will say, I may not agree with this, but I trust that you have done everything in your power to make sure that this has the team's best interest in mind. And if your team trusts you, they might disagree with you, but they will back you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think we are nearing the end of the session time. So maybe Carolina, if you agree, this may be a good time to open up for any questions.
Absolutely. Yes.
And for me, the chat window is not loading for some reason. So maybe Noreen, if you're able to
Yes,
see any questions, maybe
sure,
you can share those.
sure, absolutely. Yeah. We have comments right now from Clinton. He's specifically for you, Bhavna, saying, I believe that your position being scrutinized by your team also shows that you have built an environment where they feel comfortable enough to share that feedback. And Megha has also said, totally agree, being honest is the key, again, coming from a comment. Venkatesh has a question. What is something you wish someone would have told you when you first became a leader? And that's for both of